I should have known something was wrong when Evie spent 2 hours getting ready for what she called just a casual birthday party. Standing in front of our bedroom mirror, she applied her third coat of lipstick while I watched from the doorway, already dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt. "You're really going all out for Dina's birthday," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. Evie turned around, her black dress hugging curves I hadn't been allowed to appreciate in months. "What's that supposed to mean, Simon? Can't a woman look nice for her friend's party?" There it was, that defensive tone that had become her default whenever I made any observation about her behavior. I held up my hands in surrender. "I just meant you look beautiful, that's all." She studied my face for a moment, then smiled that practiced smile she'd perfected over our 8 years of marriage. "Thank you, and try to have fun tonight, okay? You've been so tense lately." The club was exactly what I'd expected. Loud music, overpriced drinks, and a crowd of 20-somethings pretending they weren't pushing 30. Our table was in the VIP section, courtesy of Dina's new boyfriend, who apparently had connections. Lauren, Evie's sister, was already 3 drinks in when we arrived, her voice carrying over the music as she regaled everyone with stories about her latest dating disasters. "Simon!" Dina practically shouted as we approached. "So glad you could make it. Evie wasn't sure you'd come." I glanced at my wife, who was suddenly very interested in adjusting her purse strap. "Why wouldn't I come to celebrate your birthday?" "Oh, you know." Dinah waved her hand vaguely. "Work stuff, being busy. Evie mentioned you've been stressed." Before I could respond, a tall guy with perfectly styled hair and an expensive watch approached our table. This had to be Kellen Drake, the coworker Evie had mentioned exactly once in passing. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, his smile a little too bright as his eyes found my wife. "Happy birthday, Dinah," he said, setting down a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Then he turned to Evie. "And you must be the famous Evie I've heard so much about." "Famous?" I watched as my wife's cheeks flushed pink, her laugh a little too musical as she extended her hand. "Kellen, right, I've heard wonderful things about you too." The handshake lasted 3 seconds too long. "And this is my husband, Simon," Evie added, almost as an afterthought. Kellen's grip was firm, his smile never wavering. "Great to meet you, man. Evie talks about you all the time." Funny because she'd never mentioned him at all. The evening progressed with more drinks, louder music, and increasingly animated conversations. I found myself relegated to the edge of our group, nursing a beer while watching Evie transform into someone I barely recognized. She laughed at every joke Kellen made, touched his arm when she spoke to him, and somehow managed to position herself next to him whenever the group rearranged itself. "She's just being friendly," Lauren said, sliding into the seat beside me during a particularly loud song. "Don't read too much into it." "I'm not reading into anything," I replied, though we both knew that was a lie. "Good, because you know how Evie gets when she thinks you're being paranoid." Paranoid. That was the word Evie had been using a lot lately whenever I expressed concern about her behavior, her late nights at work, her sudden interest in going out with coworkers. According to my wife, I was paranoid, controlling, and jealous. Never mind that I'd never exhibited any of these traits in the 8 years we'd been together. Around midnight, the music shifted to something slower, and couples began moving to the small dance floor. Kellen stood up, extending his hand to Evie with that same confident smile. "Dance with the birthday girl's friend?" he asked. Evie looked at me for exactly half a second before placing her hand in his. "I'd love to." I watched them move together, his hands on her waist, her arms around his neck. They talked and laughed, their faces inches apart, completely absorbed in each other. When the song ended, they didn't return to the table. Instead, they stayed for another song and another. "You should go dance with your wife," Dina suggested, but her tone lacked conviction. She seems happy where she is, I replied, taking another sip of my beer. That's when it happened. During the third song, as I watched from our table with growing unease, Kellen leaned down and whispered something in Evee's ear. She threw her head back and laughed, and then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, she kissed him. Not a quick peck, not an accidental brush of lips. A real kiss, with her hands tangled in his hair and his arms pulling her closer. The table fell silent. Even Lauren stopped mid-sentence, her drink halfway to her lips. Dina's eyes went wide, and several other people in our group turned to look at me, waiting for my reaction. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling strangely unsteady, and walked to the dance floor. The music seemed to fade as I approached them, my heart pounding so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. "Evee," I said quietly. They broke apart, but not quickly. Not like two people who'd made a mistake. Evee turned to face me, her lipstick smudged, her eyes bright with alcohol, and something else I didn't want to name. "Simon, we were just dancing." "I saw what you were doing," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "We need to go home." Kellen stepped back slightly, but he didn't look embarrassed or apologetic. If anything, he looked amused. "Hey man, we were just having fun. No harm done." "No harm done," I repeated, staring at him. "You just kissed my wife." "Simon, stop," Evee said, grabbing my arm. "You're making a scene. It was just a kiss. It didn't mean anything." Just a kiss. As if 8 years of marriage, a 7-year-old daughter, and a life we'd built together could be dismissed with those 4 words. "We're leaving," I said firmly. "Now." Evee's expression hardened. She pulled her arm away from me and stepped closer to Kellen, as if seeking protection. "No, we're not. This is Dina's birthday party, and I'm not leaving because you're having some kind of jealous fit." The music was still playing, but I could feel eyes on us from all directions. Our table had gone completely quiet, and even strangers were starting to stare. This was exactly the kind of public confrontation I'd always avoided, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. "Jealous fit," I said, my voice rising slightly. "My wife just kissed another man in front of me, and you think this is about jealousy?" "It was harmless," Evee shot back. "God, Simon, when did you become so uptight? We were dancing, having fun, and yes, we kissed. So what? It's not like I'm having an affair." The words hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to examine. Around us, the dance floor had cleared slightly as people sensed the drama unfolding. "So what?" I repeated. "So what? Evee, we're married. We have a daughter. This isn't harmless." She rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes, and turned to face our table, where Lauren, Dinah, and the others were watching with rapt attention. When she spoke, her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know what, Simon? If you don't like it, divorce me." The words hit me like a physical blow. In all our years together, through every argument and disagreement, the word divorce had never been mentioned. It was the nuclear option, the thing we both understood was off the table no matter how angry we got. But here she was, throwing it out casually in front of a room full of strangers, as if our marriage was something disposable. I looked at her face, flushed, defiant, completely unrepentant, and realized I was looking at a stranger. This wasn't the woman I'd married, the mother of my child, the person I'd trusted with my heart and my future. This was someone else entirely, someone who could kiss another man and then mock me for caring. "Fine," I said quietly. The single word seemed to surprise her. Her confident expression flickered for just a moment, uncertainty creeping in around the edges. "What?" I said fine. I pulled out my phone and called an Uber. "Enjoy your party, Evee. I'll see you at home." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with Kellen's arm around her waist and 30 people staring at the wreckage of my marriage. I spent the night in our guest room, staring at the ceiling and listening for the sound of Evee's key in the front door. She didn't come home until after 3 a.m., and when she did, She made no effort to be quiet. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the refrigerator opening and closing, water running in the kitchen sink. Part of me expected her to knock on the guest room door, to try to explain or apologize, or at least acknowledge what had happened. But she didn't. She went straight to our bedroom, her bedroom now, I supposed, and I heard the door close with a definitive click. I must have dozed off around dawn, because the next thing I knew, Laya was shaking my shoulder. "Daddy, why are you sleeping in here?" My 7-year-old daughter stood beside the bed in her princess pajamas, her dark hair messy from sleep, brown eyes wide with concern. She looked so much like Evie that my chest tightened. "I just couldn't sleep last night, sweetheart," I said, sitting up and pulling her into a hug. "Sometimes grown-ups have trouble sleeping in their own beds." "Is Mommy sick?" "She's still in bed and she usually makes breakfast on Saturdays." I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. It was almost 10 a.m., and Evie was notorious for being an early riser. She must have one hell of a hangover. "How about I make breakfast today?" I suggested. "We could make pancakes. The Mickey Mouse ones you like." Laya's face brightened. "With chocolate chips?" "With chocolate chips," I confirmed, grateful for the distraction. We spent the morning in the kitchen, mixing batter and flipping pancakes while I tried to pretend everything was normal. Laya chatted about her upcoming school play and her friend Madison's new puppy, blissfully unaware that her parents' marriage had imploded 12 hours earlier. Evee finally emerged around noon, wearing sunglasses indoors and moving like every step caused her physical pain. She'd changed into yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Without the makeup and party dress, she looked younger, more like the woman I'd married. "Morning," she said quietly, heading straight for the coffee maker. "Mommy!" Laya ran to her, wrapping her arms around Evie's waist. "Daddy made Mickey Mouse pancakes. There are some left if you want them." "That's sweet, baby, but Mummy's tummy hurts today." Evie's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. "Maybe later." Laya looked between us, her 7-year-old intuition picking up on the tension. "Are you and Daddy fighting?" "No, sweetheart," Evie said quickly. "We're not fighting. Sometimes grown-ups just need quiet time in the morning." It was a lie, but a necessary one. Whatever was happening between Evie and me, Laya didn't need to be caught in the middle of it. "Why don't you go watch cartoons for a while?" I suggested. "Mommy and Daddy need to talk about some boring grown-up stuff." Laya nodded and skipped out of the kitchen, leaving us alone for the first time since the party. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken accusations and hurt feelings. "So," Evie said finally, not looking at me as she stirred sugar into her coffee, "are we going to talk about last night, or are you just going to give me the silent treatment?" "I'm not giving you the silent treatment," I replied. "I'm trying to figure out what to say to my wife who kissed another man and then told me to divorce her." She flinched slightly at the words, but her defensive posture didn't change. "I was drunk, Simon. People do stupid things when they're drunk. It didn't mean anything." "Which part didn't mean anything? The kissing, or telling me to divorce you?" "Both." She finally looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed behind the sunglasses. "God, you're acting like I had sex with him on the dance floor. It was one kiss, one stupid, meaningless kiss." "In front of all our friends," I added. "In front of people we have to see again. People who now think my wife has so little respect for me that she'll make out with her coworker while I'm sitting 20 feet away." "Our friends?" Evie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Those are my friends, Simon. My coworkers, my sister, my social circle. You barely know half of them." The words stung because they were partially true. Over the years, I'd let Evie take the lead on our social life. She was the extrovert, the one who made plans and maintained friendships. I preferred quiet evenings at home, game nights with a few close friends, family barbecues. I'd been content to let her be our social coordinator, never realizing how isolated that would leave me when things went wrong. "You're right," I said. "They are your friends, which makes it even worse that you humiliated me in front of them." I didn't humiliate you, she snapped. You humiliated yourself by storming over there, like some caveman marking his territory. Kellen and I were just dancing, having fun, and yes, we kissed. It happens, Simon. People kiss at parties. It's not the end of the world. People kiss at parties, I repeated slowly. Is that really your defense? That infidelity is just something that happens at parties. Infidelity? Evee's voice rose, and I heard Lia's cartoon pause in the living room. She was listening. Jesus Christ, Simon, it was one kiss. I'm not having an affair. Then what would you call it? I'd call it a moment of poor judgment that you're blowing completely out of proportion because you've been looking for reasons to be suspicious of me for months. There it was again. The accusation that my concerns were really about my own insecurity rather than her behavior. It was a neat trick, turning every conversation about her actions into a discussion of my character flaws. I haven't been suspicious, I said quietly. I've been concerned. There's a difference. Concerned about what? About the late nights at work, about the new clothes and the sudden interest in going out with coworkers, about the way you've been pulling away from me and Lia for the past 6 months. Evee set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. I've been pulling away? Simon, you're the one who falls asleep on the couch every night watching TV. You're the one who hasn't planned a date night, or a weekend getaway, or even suggested we go out to dinner in months. I've been trying to have a social life, to maintain friendships, to feel like a human being instead of just a wife and mother. And apparently, that makes me the villain. The accusation hung between us, and I realized with a sinking feeling that she wasn't entirely wrong. I had been distant lately, stressed about work and content to let our relationship run on autopilot. But that didn't excuse what had happened last night. You're right, I said. I haven't been the most attentive husband lately. But Evee, if you were unhappy, if you needed something from me, why didn't you just talk to me? Why did it have to come to this? For a moment, her expression softened, and I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd married. But then the defenses went back up, and she shook her head. Because every time I try to talk to you about anything important, you shut down. You give me one-word answers and go back to your computer or your phone or whatever project you're working on. It's like living with a roommate, not a husband. So you decided to find what you were missing somewhere else. I decided to have fun for once, she shot back. I decided to feel attractive and interesting and alive, instead of like some suburban housewife whose biggest excitement is grocery shopping and parent-teacher conferences. The words were like a slap. 8 years of marriage, a beautiful daughter, a home we'd built together, and she saw it all as some kind of prison. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said, and I meant it. I'm sorry I didn't realize how unhappy you were. But Evee, what happened last night crossed a line. You kissed another man, and when I confronted you about it, you told me to divorce you, in front of everyone. How am I supposed to come back from that? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller, less certain. I don't know, she admitted. I was drunk and angry and embarrassed. I said things I didn't mean. Which things didn't you mean? The kiss or the divorce comment? Both, all of it. She looked up at me, and I could see tears behind the sunglasses. I don't want a divorce, Simon. I want us to work this out. For a moment, I felt hope flicker in my chest. Maybe this was salvageable. Maybe we could find our way back to each other, learn from this mistake, and build something stronger. But then I remembered the look on her face when she'd kissed Kellen. The joy, the abandon, the complete lack of guilt. I remembered how she'd stepped closer to him when I confronted them, seeking his protection instead of trying to comfort me. I remembered the casual cruelty of her words. If you don't like it, divorce me. I want that too, I said finally. But I need to understand what happened. I need to know that you understand how much you hurt me, and I need to believe that it won't happen again. Of course it won't happen again, she said quickly. Simon, I love you. I love our family. Last night was a mistake, a stupid, drunken mistake that I regret completely. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. But something in her tone, some subtle lack of conviction, made me hesitate. What about Kellen? I asked. Are you going to keep working with him, seeing him at office parties and happy hours? He's a coworker, she said, her voice becoming defensive again. I can't exactly avoid him completely. But you can avoid being alone with him. You can avoid dancing with him at parties. You can set boundaries. Of course, she said, but she looked away as she said it. Whatever you need me to do. We talked for another hour, going in circles, making tentative plans for counseling and date nights and better communication. But underneath it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had broken between us. Trust, maybe, or respect, or just the simple belief that we were on the same team. That afternoon, while Evee napped off her hangover and Laya played in her room, I sat in my home office and did something I'd never thought I'd do. I started taking notes. I wrote down everything I could remember about the previous night, the timeline, the witnesses, the exact words that had been spoken. I noted the names of everyone who'd been at our table, everyone who'd seen the kiss and heard Evee's challenge. I told myself I was just processing what had happened, trying to make sense of it all. But deep down, I knew I was creating a record. Insurance, maybe. Or evidence. Just in case. The call from my mother came Sunday morning, while Evee was in the shower and Laya was eating cereal in front of the TV. Simon, honey, how are you doing? Helen Morland's voice carried that particular tone of maternal concern that meant she already knew something was wrong. I'm fine, Mum. How are you and Dad? We're good, but I'm not calling about us. Lauren posted some pictures from that party on Friday night, and I saw some things that concerned me. My stomach dropped. I'd been hoping that what happened at the club would stay at the club, at least until Evee and I figured out how to handle it. But of course, in the age of social media, nothing stayed private for long. What did you see? I asked, though I already knew. Pictures of Evee dancing with some man, very close dancing, and the comments. She paused, choosing her words carefully. People were talking, Simon, asking questions. I closed my eyes, imagining my mother scrolling through Facebook, seeing her daughter-in-law wrapped around another man while strangers speculated about the state of my marriage. It's complicated, Mom. I'm sure it is, but I think we need to talk about it. Why don't you and Evee bring Laya over for Sunday dinner today? Your father's making his famous ribs. It was phrased as an invitation, but I recognized the command underneath. Helen Morland had raised 3 sons and managed a household with military precision for 40 years. When she wanted a family meeting, you showed up. I'll talk to Evee, I said. Good, and Simon? Whatever's going on, you know your father and I are here for you. The conversation with Evee about Sunday dinner went about as well as I'd expected. Your mother saw Lauren's pictures, she said, her voice tight with anger. Great, just great. I suppose she's already decided I'm some kind of harlot. She's concerned, I said carefully. She loves us both, and she wants to understand what happened. What happened is that I had a few drinks and danced with a coworker, and now I'm going to be put on trial by your family. Evee was getting dressed for the dinner, pulling on a conservative blouse, and checking her appearance in the mirror. This is exactly why I didn't want to go over there today. We can't avoid them forever, and Laya loves seeing her grandparents. Fine, but I'm not going to sit there and be lectured about my behavior by a woman who's never worked outside the home and thinks a woman's place is in the kitchen. I bit back my response. My mother had actually worked as a nurse for 15 years before my youngest brother was born, and she'd never said anything remotely disparaging about working mothers. But Evee was in full defensive mode, and facts weren't going to penetrate her armor. The drive to my parents' house was tense, with Laya chattering happily in the back seat while Evee stared out the window, and I focused on not saying anything that would start another argument. My parents lived in the same suburban neighborhood where I'd grown up, in a modest ranch house with a perfectly maintained lawn and my mother's prize-winning rose garden. Dad was on the back deck when we arrived, tending to a rack of ribs that smelled like heaven. "There's my favorite granddaughter," he called out as Leia ran to him for a hug. "I'm your only granddaughter, Grandpa," she giggled. "That just makes you extra special," he replied, winking at me over her head. Martin Morland was a man of few words, who preferred to express his love through actions rather than speeches. He'd taught me to throw a baseball, change a tire, and treat people with respect. He'd also taught me, mostly by example, that a good man protected his family and kept his word. Mom emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron and a carefully neutral expression. She hugged Leia first, then me, then Evee, though I noticed the embrace with my wife was shorter and less warm than usual. "Dinner will be ready in about an hour," she announced. "Evee, would you mind helping me with the salad? I could use an extra pair of hands." It wasn't really a request. Evee followed Mom into the kitchen while Dad, Leia, and I stayed on the deck. Through the sliding glass door, I could see the two women moving around each other with polite efficiency, their conversation too quiet to overhear. "Everything okay, son?" Dad asked, not looking up from the grill. "Not really," I admitted. He nodded slowly, flipping the ribs with practiced precision. "Want to talk about it?" I glanced at Leia, who was busy drawing with sidewalk chalk on the patio. "Maybe later." "Fair enough, but you know your mother's not going to let this slide, right? She's got that look." I knew the look he was talking about. It was the same expression Mum had worn when she'd confronted my teenage brothers about missed curfews and mysterious dents in the car. It was the look of a woman who knew something was wrong and intended to get to the bottom of it. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Mom had made all of Leia's favorites, and my daughter regaled us with stories about school and her friends, while the adults made polite conversation about work and the weather. But I could feel the tension building, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. The explosion came during dessert. "So," Mum said, cutting slices of apple pie with surgical precision, "I saw some interesting pictures from your party the other night, Evee." Evee's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Did you?" "Mm-hmm. Lauren posted quite a few. You looked like you were having a wonderful time." "I was. It was Dina's birthday, and we were celebrating." "I could see that. You seemed particularly close with one of the other guests. A very handsome young man." The words were delivered with Mom's trademark smile, but there was steel underneath. Evee set down her fork and straightened in her chair. "Kellen is a coworker. We were just dancing." Of course, though some of the comments on Lauren's pictures suggested it was a bit more than dancing. "Mom," I said quietly, glancing at Leia, who was focused on her pie but clearly listening. "What comments?" Evee demanded. Mom pulled out her phone and scrolled through it with the deliberate movements of someone making a point. "Let's see. Evie's getting her groove on. Someone's having more fun than her husband. Is that Simon's wife or his ex-wife? Oh, and this one from someone named Jessica. Well, that's awkward." Each comment hit like a physical blow. I'd known people were talking, but seeing it laid out like that, the casual cruelty of social media gossip, made it real in a way I hadn't prepared for. "Those people don't know what they're talking about," Evee said, her voice rising slightly. "They're just stirring up drama because they have boring lives." "Are they?" Mum asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my son's wife was publicly humiliating him while he sat there and watched." "Helen," Dad said quietly, but Mum was just getting started. "I've been married to your father for 38 years, she continued, "and in all that time, I have never, not once, given anyone reason to question my commitment to this family. I've never danced with another man the way you were dancing with that boy. I've never given the neighbors something to gossip about, and I've certainly never embarrassed my husband in front of our friends." "Times were different when you were young," Evee shot back. "Women weren't expected to be perfect little housewives who never had any fun." "Fun?" Mum's voice was dangerously quiet. "You call disrespecting your marriage fun?" I call dancing at a party fun, yes. I call having friends and a social life fun. I call feeling attractive and interesting fun. I'm sorry if that offends your 1950s sensibilities. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Laya had stopped eating, her eyes wide as she looked between the adults. Dad cleared his throat and reached for his coffee cup, while I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger. Evie, I said quietly. No, Simon. I'm tired of being judged by people who don't understand what it's like to be young and married with a child. I'm tired of being expected to be some perfect wife who never makes mistakes or has any desires of her own. Is that what you think this is about? Mom asked. Desires? Because from where I'm sitting, this is about respect. Respect for your husband, your marriage, and your family. And frankly, based on what I saw in those pictures, you seem to have very little of any of those things. Evie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. Yes, you do, Mom replied calmly. Because this is my house, and you're part of this family, and families talk about problems instead of pretending they don't exist. What problem? Evie demanded. I danced with a coworker at a party. I had a few drinks and maybe got a little carried away. It's not the scandal you're making it out to be. A little carried away? Mom's eyebrows rose. Evie, you kissed that man. In public, in front of your husband, in front of people who know your family. And when Simon tried to address it, you told him to divorce you. How is that not a scandal? I saw Evie's face go pale as she realized that Mom knew everything. Not just what was in the pictures, but what had been said. Someone at that party had been talking, sharing details, spreading the story beyond just social media posts. Who told you that? Evie asked. Does it matter? The point is that you humiliated my son, embarrassed your daughter, and damaged your marriage for what? A moment of attention from some boy who probably doesn't even respect you enough to keep his mouth shut about it. That's enough, I said, standing up. This had gone too far, and Laya was starting to look upset. Mom, I appreciate your concern, but this is between Evie and me. Is it? Mom looked at me with those sharp eyes that had seen through every excuse I'd ever tried to make as a teenager. Because it seems to me like everyone else knows about it except you. People are talking, Simon. About your wife, about your marriage, about whether you're man enough to handle your own household. The words hit their target. In my mother's generation, a man's ability to handle his household was a measure of his worth, his strength, his fundamental competence as a human being. She was telling me, in the kindest way possible, that I was being seen as weak. I can handle my own marriage, I said quietly. Can you? Because right now, it looks like your wife is calling the shots, and you're just along for the ride. Evie grabbed her purse from the counter. I'm leaving. Laya, get your jacket. No, I said firmly. Laya stays. If you want to leave, that's your choice, but our daughter doesn't need to be dragged into this. For a moment, Evie looked like she might argue, but then she glanced at Laya's confused face and seemed to think better of it. Fine, but don't expect me to come back here anytime soon. She stormed out, leaving the rest of us in uncomfortable silence. A few minutes later, we heard her car start and pull out of the driveway. Daddy? Laya's small voice broke the quiet. Is Mommy mad at Grandma? Mommy's just upset, sweetheart, I said, pulling her into my lap. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about things. Are you and Mommy going to get divorced? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. How do you explain adult problems to a 7-year-old? How do you reassure a child when you're not sure of anything yourself? We're working through some problems, I said carefully. But no matter what happens between Mommy and me, we both love you very much, and that will never change. It wasn't really an answer, but it was the best I could do. Dad suggested we watch a movie, and we spent the rest of the evening pretending everything was normal, while Laya dozed between us on the couch. But when it was time to go home, Mom walked me to the car, while Dad carried Leia to her car seat. I'm sorry if I was too harsh, she said quietly. But Simon, That girl is playing games with you, and you need to wake up before it's too late. I know she made a mistake, I replied, but we've been together 8 years. We have a daughter. I can't just throw that away over one bad night. One bad night? Mom shook her head. Honey, this isn't about one bad night. This is about a pattern of behavior, a fundamental lack of respect for you and your marriage. And if you don't address it now, it's only going to get worse. She was right, and I knew it. But knowing something and being ready to act on it were two different things. What would you do? I asked. If you were in my position, what would you do? Mum was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street where she'd raised her children and built her life. I'd protect myself, she said finally. I'd document everything, get my affairs in order, and make sure I was prepared for whatever came next. Because, son, I've been watching that girl for 8 years, and this isn't a phase. This is who she is. And you deserve better than someone who treats you like an option instead of a priority. The drive home was quiet, with Laya asleep in the back seat, and my mother's words echoing in my head. When we got to the house, Evee's car was in the driveway, but all the lights were off except for the one in our bedroom. I carried Laya inside and tucked her into bed, then stood in the hallway outside my own bedroom, listening to the silence beyond the door. Part of me wanted to go in, to try to salvage something from the wreckage of the day. But a larger part of me was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of defending, tired of pretending that everything was going to be okay. I went back to the guest room and closed the door. The next few weeks fell into an uncomfortable routine. Evee and I were polite to each other in front of Laya, discussing schedules and household logistics with the careful courtesy of roommates. But the underlying tension was always there, simmering just beneath the surface of our conversations. Evee went back to work on Monday, as if nothing had happened. She left early, came home late, and spent most evenings on her phone, texting with friends or scrolling through social media. She'd apologized once more for the confrontation at my parents' house, but it was a perfunctory apology, delivered without eye contact or conviction. Your mother was out of line, she'd said, but I shouldn't have lost my temper in front of Laya. It was the kind of non-apology that acknowledged the reaction without taking responsibility for the action. She was sorry for getting caught, not sorry for what she'd done. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. The way she guarded her phone, taking it with her to the bathroom and keeping it face down on the table during dinner. The new clothes that kept appearing in her closet, sexier outfits than she'd worn in years. The sudden interest in working late and attending office happy hours. 2 weeks after the party, she announced that she'd be staying late on Friday for a farewell party for someone in accounting. Who's leaving? I asked, not looking up from the laptop, where I was reviewing quarterly reports for my own job. Janet Morrison. She's been there for like 15 years. They're doing a big send-off at Murphy's pub. I've never heard you mention Janet Morrison. She works in a different department, but it's important to show support for long-time employees, you know, company morale and all that. It sounded reasonable. It even sounded noble, but something in her tone made me suspicious. What time do you think you'll be home? I don't know. Probably not too late. 10, maybe 11. She didn't get home until almost 1 a.m. I was awake when she came in, lying in the guest room bed with my eyes closed, listening to her movements through the house. She was trying to be quiet, but I could hear her shoes on the hardwood, the soft click of the refrigerator door, the creak of the stairs as she went up to our bedroom. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I checked her phone. It happened by accident, or at least that's what I told myself. She'd left it on the kitchen counter while she took a shower, and I was making coffee when it buzzed with a text message. The preview showed on the lock screen before I could look away. Had an amazing time last night. Can't stop thinking about... The message was from Kellen. My hands were shaking as I set down the coffee mug. I stared at the phone, willing it to buzz again, to show me the rest of the message. But the screen went dark, leaving me with those 8 words and the imagination that filled in the blanks with increasingly painful possibilities. I heard the shower turn off upstairs and quickly moved away from the counter. When Evie came down 10 minutes later, her hair wet and her face flushed from the hot water, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, pretending to work. "Morning," she said, grabbing her phone and checking it quickly. I saw her expression change slightly as she read whatever messages had come in, but she didn't say anything. "How was the party last night?" I asked. "Fine, nice turnout. Janet was really touched that so many people came." She was pouring coffee as she spoke, not looking at me. "Sorry I was later than I expected. You know how these things go." "Was Kellen there?" The question slipped out before I could stop myself. Evie's hand stilled for just a moment before she continued stirring sugar into her coffee. "I think so. I mean, probably. Most of the office was there." "Did you talk to him?" Now she did look at me, her expression carefully neutral. "Simon, he's a coworker. Of course I talked to him. I talked to lots of people. It was a party." "Right, of course." But I couldn't let it go. Over the next few days, I found myself looking for clues, evidence, proof of what I already suspected but didn't want to believe. I started noting the times she left for work and came home. I paid attention to her mood when she got off the phone. I listened to the way she talked about her job, her coworkers, her daily activities. And slowly, a pattern emerged. Evie was happier on the days she worked late. She hummed while getting dressed on mornings when she had lunch meetings that she couldn't fully explain. She smiled at her phone in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. The breaking point came 3 weeks after the party, on a Thursday evening when Evie announced that she had to work late again. "Big presentation tomorrow," she said, already changing into a dress that seemed awfully nice for staying late at the office. "I'll probably be there until at least 10. "On a Thursday night?" "The client is flying in from Seattle tomorrow morning. We need everything to be perfect." It sounded plausible. Evie worked for a mid-sized marketing firm that did business with companies all over the country. Late nights and last-minute presentations were part of the job, but something made me suspicious enough to drive by her office building at 8:30 that night. The parking lot was nearly empty. Evie's car was nowhere to be seen. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, telling myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe they'd moved the meeting to a client site. Maybe they'd gone to dinner to discuss strategy. Maybe I'd missed her car in the shadows. But I knew I was lying to myself. I drove home and waited. Evie came in at 11:15, her hair slightly mussed, her makeup faded. She looked like a woman who'd been somewhere other than a sterile office building. "How did the presentation prep go?" I asked. "Good, really good. I think we're in great shape for tomorrow." She was already heading toward the stairs, avoiding eye contact. "I'm exhausted. Going to bed." "Evie." She stopped, one foot on the bottom step. "Where were you tonight?" "I told you, work. I drove by your office. The parking lot was empty." The silence stretched between us, heavy with accusation and denial. When she finally turned around, her face was a mask of indignant anger. "You're spying on me now?" "I'm trying to understand why my wife is lying to me." "I'm not lying. We moved the meeting to the Marriott downtown. The conference room at our office wasn't big enough for all the materials we needed to review." It was smooth, delivered without hesitation. If I hadn't been looking for it, I might have missed the slight tightness around her eyes that suggested she was improvising. "Which Marriott?" "The one on 5th Street. Simon, I can't believe you're interrogating me like this. I'm working my ass off to help support this family, and you're treating me like a criminal." "I'm treating you like someone who's been lying to me." "I haven't been lying." Her voice rose and I heard a door open upstairs. Liar, woken up by the argument. God, you're so paranoid. Just because you don't trust me doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong. There it was again. The deflection, the implication that my suspicions were the real problem. But this time, I didn't back down. "Then prove it," I said quietly. "What?" "Prove you were at the Marriott." Show me the presentation materials. Give me the name of the client. Something, anything, that proves you're telling me the truth. Her face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally, cold determination. "I don't have to prove anything to you," she said. "I'm your wife, not your employee. If you can't trust me, that's your problem, not mine." She turned and walked upstairs, leaving me standing in the kitchen with the certain knowledge that my marriage was over. I just didn't know how to end it yet. That night, I started a file on my computer. I called it documentation and told myself it was just for my own clarity, a way to keep track of events and conversations so I could make sense of what was happening. But I knew what it really was. It was evidence. I documented everything I could remember: dates, times, conversations, inconsistencies in Evee's stories. I printed out copies of our phone bills, highlighting the calls and texts to Kellen's number. I researched divorce attorneys and child custody laws. I felt like I was planning a military campaign, gathering intelligence for a battle I didn't want to fight but couldn't seem to avoid. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 months ago, I'd been a happily married man who trusted his wife completely. Now I was conducting surveillance and building legal strategies. The transformation felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. But there was also a strange sense of relief in finally taking action, in gathering facts, instead of just absorbing accusations and deflections. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some measure of control over my own life. I was going to need it for what came next. The final proof came in the form of a credit card statement that arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October. Evee had already left for work, and Laya was at school, so I was alone when I opened the envelope and saw the charges that confirmed what I'd suspected for weeks. Dinner for two at Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, on the same night she'd claimed to be working late on the Morrison farewell party. A charge at Victoria's Secret the day before she'd announced another client presentation. 2 tickets to a movie theatre across town, purchased on an afternoon when she'd told me she was having lunch with her sister. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the evidence of my wife's deception, feeling strangely calm. The uncertainty was over. The gaslighting and deflection and careful explanations that never quite added up, all of it could stop now because I finally had proof. I took photos of every suspicious charge, then called the law office I'd been researching for weeks. "Law offices of Patricia Chen, how may I help you? I'd like to schedule a consultation with Ms. Chen regarding a divorce." The appointment was set for Friday afternoon. I told Evee I had a dentist appointment and left work early, driving across town to a glass office building that housed some of the city's most successful attorneys. Patricia Chen was a small woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened without interruption as I laid out the timeline of my marriage's collapse, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "Do you have documentation of any of this?" she asked when I finished. I slid a folder across her desk. Credit card statements, phone records, photos from the party where this all started, notes from conversations with witnesses. She flipped through the materials with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen it all before. "This is quite thorough, Mr. Morland. Most clients come in with suspicions and emotions. You've come in with evidence." "I'm an IT professional. Documentation is part of my job. It shows, and it's going to serve you well." She closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. "Based on what you've shown me, we have grounds for divorce based on adultery. The question is, what do you want to achieve?" "I want custody of my daughter, and I want this to be over quickly and cleanly." Custody cases can be complicated, especially when one parent alleges infidelity. But given the evidence you've gathered, and the fact that your wife's behavior has been public enough to generate social media gossip, I think we have a strong case. We spent the next hour discussing strategy, timelines, and potential outcomes. Ms. Chen explained the process, the paperwork, the likely responses from Evee's legal representation. It was clinical, professional, and utterly devastating to contemplate. "I have to ask," she said as our meeting wound down, "are you certain you want to proceed? Marriage counseling, separation, trial reconciliation, there are other options." "I've considered all of them," I replied, "but my wife has shown no genuine remorse for her actions, no willingness to change her behavior, and no respect for our marriage vows. I can't continue to live in a relationship where I'm constantly questioning whether I'm being told the truth." She nodded. "Then let's proceed. I'll have the papers drawn up by Monday." "How would you like to serve them?" "At her workplace. I want this to be as professional and documented as possible." "Very well. We'll arrange for a process server to deliver them Monday afternoon." I drove home feeling like I was in a strange dream. In less than a week, I would officially end an 8-year marriage. The life I'd built, the future I'd planned, the family I'd cherished, all of it would be legally dissolved by a set of documents that reduced our relationship to a series of allegations and asset divisions. That weekend was surreal. Evee was in a good mood, chatting about her work projects and making plans for Laya's upcoming school play. She seemed completely unaware that her marriage was about to end, that her husband had spent the week consulting with attorneys and gathering evidence of her infidelity. I found myself studying her face, looking for signs of guilt or remorse, or even awareness that her actions had consequences. But there was nothing. She laughed at TV shows, helped Laya with homework, and complained about her mother's latest phone call with the casual ease of someone whose conscience was completely clear. Sunday evening, as we sat in the living room after Laya had gone to bed, she even suggested we plan a vacation. "I was thinking maybe Florida for spring break," she said, scrolling through travel websites on her laptop. "Laya's never been to Disney World, and I could use some time away from work." "That sounds nice," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "We could do one of those package deals, hotel, park tickets, maybe even the dining plan." She looked up at me with genuine enthusiasm. "It would be good for us to get away together, don't you think? Just focus on being a family." The irony was staggering. Here she was, planning a family vacation while carrying on an affair, talking about being a family, while systematically destroying the foundation of our marriage. Did she really not understand what she'd done? Or was this elaborate performance just another layer of manipulation? "Sure," I said, "we can look into it." Monday afternoon, I was in a meeting when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Papers have been served. Clean delivery, no incidents." I excused myself from the meeting and went to the bathroom, where I sat in a stall and tried to process the fact that it was done. Somewhere across town, Evee was holding divorce papers that would end our marriage and change our daughter's life forever. My phone rang 20 minutes later. "What the hell is this, Simon?" Evee's voice was shaking with rage and shock. "Someone just handed me divorce papers at work, in front of my entire department." "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "You're divorcing me? Without even talking to me about it? Without trying counseling or separation or anything?" "We've been talking about it for weeks, Evee. Ever since you told me to divorce you at that party." I was drunk, I didn't mean it." "But you meant the kiss, and you meant all the lies since then, and you meant the affair with Kellen." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, more desperate. "How did you— What affair?" "Simon, I haven't been having an affair." "Romano's Restaurant, October 15th. Victoria's Secret, October 20th. Movie tickets for 2 on October 22nd, the day you told me you were having lunch with Lauren." I read the charges from memory, each one a nail in the coffin of her denials. "Should I continue?" Another long silence. Then, "You've been spying on me, going through my credit card statements, monitoring my activities." That's crazy, Simon," That's not normal behavior. Even now, even caught red-handed with evidence she couldn't deny, she was trying to make me the villain. It was almost impressive in its audacity. What's not normal is lying to your husband about where you spend your evenings. What's not normal is kissing your coworker in public and then denying you're having an affair. I need to see you, she said suddenly. We need to talk about this face to face. Don't make any hasty decisions based on misunderstandings. There's nothing to misunderstand. I'll be staying at my parents' house until we can work out a custody arrangement. You can have the house for now. Custody arrangement? Simon, you can't take Laya away from me. She's my daughter. She's our daughter, and she deserves parents who can be honest with each other and with her. I can be honest. I can change. Please, just give me a chance to explain everything. But it was too late for explanations. Too late for promises and bargaining and desperate attempts at damage control. The papers had been served, the process had begun, and there was no going back. Have your attorney contact mine, I said. We'll work out the details through proper channels. I hung up before she could respond. That evening, I picked up Laya from her after-school program and drove to my parents' house, where I had to explain to my 7-year-old daughter that Mommy and Daddy were getting divorced. It was the hardest conversation of my life, but as I watched my mother comfort Laya and my father quietly move my suitcase to my old bedroom, I knew I'd made the right choice. My daughter deserved better than a home filled with lies and deception. She deserved parents who could model honesty, integrity, and respect, even if it meant her parents couldn't be married to each other. The custody hearing was scheduled for a cold Thursday morning in February, 3 months after I'd served Evee with divorce papers. Those 3 months had been a blur of legal meetings, mediation sessions, and carefully scheduled visitations with Laya. Evee had hired an attorney, a smooth-talking man named Robert Hastings, who specialized in protecting families from hasty decisions. He'd tried every angle, arguing that I was the one who'd abandoned the marriage, that my surveillance of Evee constituted emotional abuse, that my relationship with my mother was evidence of an unhealthy family dynamic that would harm Laya. None of it had worked. Patricia Chen was thorough, professional, and utterly devastating in her presentation of facts. Every claim Hastings made was met with documentation, evidence, and witness statements that painted a clear picture of who had actually abandoned our marriage. The night before the hearing, I sat in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, reviewing the timeline one more time. It felt surreal to be back in the same room where I'd done homework and worried about high school crushes, now preparing to legally end my marriage and fight for custody of my daughter. Laya was asleep down the hall, in the room that had belonged to my youngest brother. She'd adapted to the situation with the resilience that children somehow possess, though I could see the stress in her quieter moments. She asked fewer questions now, but she clung to me more tightly at bedtime. The courthouse was the imposing brick building downtown, with marble floors and high ceilings that made every footstep echo. I arrived early with Patricia Chen, both of us carrying briefcases filled with evidence that would determine my daughter's future. Evee was already there with her attorney, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom. She looked smaller than I remembered, her face pale and drawn. She'd lost weight over the past 3 months, and her clothes hung loose on her frame. Our eyes met across the hallway, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd married, vulnerable, uncertain, maybe even regretful. But then Hastings leaned over to whisper something in her ear, and the mask of defiance slipped back into place. "Mr. Morland," he approached me with his practiced smile, "I'm hoping we can reach a reasonable agreement before we go in there. My client is prepared to offer joint custody with alternating weeks, and she's willing to attend marriage counseling if you'd consider withdrawing the divorce petition." "Too late for that," Patricia replied before I could speak. "My client has made his position clear." "Think about your daughter, Mr. Morland. Is this really what's best for her? Breaking up her family over a few misunderstandings?" "A few misunderstandings. Even now, They were minimizing what had happened, trying to rewrite history to make Evie the victim instead of the architect of our marriage's destruction. "What's best for my daughter," I said quietly, "is having at least one parent who values honesty and commitment." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly sick. Judge Margaret Rodriguez was a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd reviewed all the preliminary filings, so she was familiar with our case, but she wanted to hear from both parties directly. "Mr. Morland," she said, "please tell me in your own words why you believe you should have primary custody of your daughter." I stood up, my hand steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Your Honor, I believe I should have primary custody because I can provide Laya with a stable, honest environment where she doesn't have to worry about her parents lying to each other or to her. Over the past 6 months, my wife has demonstrated a pattern of deception and disregard for our marriage vows that I believe makes her an unreliable custodial parent." "Can you give me specific examples?" Patricia nodded to me, and I began recounting the timeline we'd prepared. The party, the kiss, the lies about working late, the credit card charges that proved she'd been conducting an affair while denying it to my face. "Your Honor," I concluded, "I don't want to punish my wife for her choices, but I do want to protect my daughter from the instability and dishonesty that those choices have brought into our home." Judge Rodriguez made notes as I spoke, her expression neutral. Then she turned to Evie. "Mrs. Morland, how do you respond to these allegations?" Evie stood up, her voice shaking slightly. "Your Honor, my husband has taken a few isolated incidents and blown them completely out of proportion. Yes, I made some mistakes. I kissed a coworker at a party, and I wasn't always completely honest about my social activities. But I never had an affair, and I've never done anything that would harm my daughter." "The evidence suggests otherwise," Judge Rodriguez said, flipping through the file. "I have credit card statements showing charges for romantic dinners, intimate apparel, and entertainment for two during times when you told your husband you were working or attending business functions. Those can be explained. I also have an affidavit from your coworker, Mr. Drake, detailing the nature of your relationship." The blood drained from Evie's face. Kellen's affidavit had been Patricia's masterstroke, a detailed statement describing their relationship, complete with dates, locations, and intimate details that left no doubt about what had been happening. He's lying. He's trying to protect himself by making me look bad. Mr. Drake's statement is corroborated by photographic evidence, witness statements, and your own financial records, the judge replied. "Mrs. Morland, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've learned to recognize the difference between isolated mistakes and patterns of deception. What I see here is a pattern." Hastings tried to redirect, arguing that Evie had been going through a difficult period, that she'd learned from her mistakes, that breaking up the family would harm Laya more than keeping it together. But Judge Rodriguez had seen the evidence, and she wasn't buying it. "The court's primary concern is the best interest of the child," she said finally. "And based on the evidence presented, I believe that interest is best served by awarding primary custody to Mr. Morland." The words hit me like a physical force. I'd won. After months of uncertainty, legal battles, and sleepless nights, I'd won. Mrs. Morland will have supervised visitation every other weekend, pending successful completion of counselling and a 6-month review period. Mr. Morland will have full legal and physical custody, with Mrs. Morland responsible for child support according to state guidelines. Evie was crying now, quiet tears that she tried to hide behind her hand. Part of me felt sorry for her. She was losing her daughter, her marriage, and the life she'd taken for granted. But a larger part of me felt only relief. It was over. As we left the courthouse, Patricia Chen shook my hand with professional satisfaction. "Congratulations, Mr. Morland. You've got your daughter and you've got your life back." I looked across the courthouse steps, where Evie was standing with her attorney, both of them looking defeated. She caught my eye one last time, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. But it was too late for remorse. Too late for apologies or promises, or desperate attempts to undo the damage she'd caused. The papers were signed, the custody arrangement was final, and our marriage was officially over. That evening I picked up Laya from school and took her out for ice cream to celebrate, though I didn't tell her what we were celebrating. She chatted about her day, her friends, her upcoming science project, blissfully unaware that her father had just won the most important legal battle of his life. "Daddy," she said as we walked back to the car, "are you and Mommy going to be happier now?" The question caught me off guard. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes love isn't enough, that sometimes people make choices that break things beyond repair? "I think we're going to be okay, sweetheart," I said, lifting her into her car seat. "All of us are going to be okay." And for the first time in months, I actually believed it. 6 months later, I was living in a new house across town with Laya, who had her own room painted purple and a backyard where she could play with the puppy we'd adopted from the local shelter. Evie saw her every other weekend, their visits supervised by a court-appointed monitor who ensured that Laya wasn't exposed to any inappropriate behavior or conversations. The divorce was final, the custody arrangement was working, and my daughter was thriving in an environment free from deception and conflict. I'd started dating again, carefully, slowly, with the wisdom that comes from having your trust shattered and rebuilt. Evie had lost everything: her marriage, her daughter, her reputation, and eventually her job when the affair with Kellen became office gossip. She'd moved back in with her sister Lauren, who was apparently less supportive when faced with the reality of Evie's choices rather than just the fantasy of rebellion. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall, but I didn't regret it either. She'd made her choices, ignored the consequences, and refused to take responsibility until it was too late. The woman who had told me to divorce her at that party had gotten exactly what she'd asked for. Sometimes, late at night when Laya was asleep and the house was quiet, I thought about what might have been different if Evie had just been honest from the beginning. If she'd come to me when she was unhappy instead of seeking validation elsewhere. If she'd shown genuine remorse instead of deflection and blame. But those were questions without answers, roads not taken that led nowhere useful. What mattered now was the future I was building with my daughter, based on honesty, respect, and the hard-won knowledge that trust, once broken, is a precious thing that must be earned back through actions, not words. Evie had chosen her path that night at the club when she kissed another man and dared me to divorce her. I'd simply taken her advice.